Hi and thanks for watching the Tom Did It channel. In this video I show you how I rebuilt the complete bottom end of my Honda CRM250AR engine using the best parts I have available. For those who have been following the build or interested in the full process, the first 6 minutes of the video is focused on preparing the engine cases and getting them ready for assembly. This includes removing the old bearings, some glass blasting and lapping of the mating surfaces on my granite surfacing table. I've placed the timestamps in the description below so you can skip to any chapter that may be of interest. I use a blind bearing puller to remove the remaining bearings that cannot be removed with a hammer and punch. There's plenty of information online on how and where to use these. A few months ago I bought this second-hand blast cabinet from Facebook Marketplace to do this very job. After draining the old blast material, I upgrade the internal lighting, then refill it with new glass beads. With the blast cleaning complete, I move on to the final stage of the engine case preparation. I use my AA grade granite surfacing table to lap the mating surfaces of the engine cases. I have lightly stuck 1200 grit sandpaper to it. WD-40 is the lubricant. I find about 7 to 10 passes creates a really flat edge. I check the seal of the cases by using this size feeler gauge. Off camera, I also bolt the empty cases together and check for any gaps. Now let's move on to installing the new bearings. To install the new bearings, I'm using a very common sweat fit method. Over about 30 minutes, I gently heat up the soft aluminium engine cases to around 140 degrees. The heat will cause them to slightly expand in size. The new bearings have been in the freezer for a couple of days and are well and truly frozen at around -8. The cold causes the bearings to shrink in size. In summary, the 150-degree difference in temperature between the two metals will often allow the bearings to drop into place without any persuasion. The bearings will be locked in place once the temperature of the two metals equalize. Other bearings that sit deep in the cases will be started using this method and then gently tapped into the final position. Check the internet if you need a more thorough explanation. Now moving on to the right-hand case, the installation process is exactly the same, so I won't spend much more time on this topic. I would like to note that the bearings for this engine were very hard to find. I was told by my local Honda dealer that many of the bearings for this bike were made specifically for this model and are no longer available. So here I'm using some main crank bearings that fit a two-stroke Kawasaki KX250. According to various websites and testing them with vernier calipers, they are the same size, so I'm going to give them a try. So that's the last bearing on the right hand side case. As you can see, the bearing retainer has also been installed. Now I install the crank using the same sweat fit method as the bearings. So here are all my engine parts. If you've been following the build, you may remember that I have almost two engines. The stuff on the left was gathered from my second Honda CRM engine. These parts have been cleaned and ready to be used. The stuff on the right is out of the engine cases that I'm currently working on and will be used if and when I need them. As I move through the engine assembly, I'll be using a mixture of all these parts and only using the best items I have available. I'll be measuring each part before use then referring to the service wear limits in the manual. This will prevent me from using any worn out of spec parts and ensure that I have the best, tightest engine possible. Okay, with the gearbox, crank and gaskets in place, let's install the right hand case. Here I'm using the crank puller. If you're not sure how these work, there are plenty of videos online. Put simply, they are designed to press the engine cases over the crank without putting stress on the crank. It's critical that everything is aligned before tightening this tool, so go slow and check things every couple of turns. As I slowly lower the engine case, I use my left hand to support the rear of the engine and feel it lowering evenly. Once the case is fully pressed down, I gently tap each area around the case just to make sure the case is level on the gasket. Before I bolt the cases together, I spin the gearbox and crank to make sure they move smoothly and have no tight spots. Last up for the center cases, each bolt is coated with too much copper grease and then torqued in the engine. This was originally the end of the video, but I can't help myself. So let's press on with the assembly of the gears and clutch in the right side gold case. According to the manual, this right-hand crank seal should be pressed into the engine between 1.2 and 1.8 mil. Using a straight edge across the engine, I zero the caliper against the engine, then measure the depth of the seal. My final measurement is 1.6 mil. The Honda manual recommends this left-hand crank seal is inserted around 6.5 to 7.5 mil. As you can see, I conveniently use the side of the engine case to get this measurement. The final depth of the crank seal was 7.15 mil at each point checked, which is within spec. Moving on to the kickstart and idle gears. Feels good to get these off my desk. Check out the service wear limits as per the manual. These are easy to test and worth noting. As I mentioned earlier, installing the gearbox, I have the internal components of two engines. Without bias to what came out of this engine, I'm using the best and newest parts I have available. Moving on to the drum and shifter assembly. For me, this was by far the most intricate thing to do, as I couldn't get the springs and plungers to stay in place. Luckily for video editing, I make it seem easy and it takes me 15 seconds. It's specified in the manual to use moly grease on these balancer shaft roller bearings. I'm not sure if it's absolutely necessary or if regular grease would do, but I'm using it anyway. Now you see me taking my time to align the bump on the counterbalancer gear with the dimple on the primary gear. Incorrect timing will cause excessive vibrations. Here I'm going up and down the gears, checking there's no issues. After measuring the main shaft, we move on to the clutch pack assembly. You'll see two clutch kits. The set on the left is out of this motor, the set on the right is out of my second engine. The service wear limit on the friction discs is 2.9 mil. Any lower, the manual recommends they be replaced. On that basis, I'll be using the friction discs on the right. Moving on to the steel plates. Both sets were checked for warpage on my granite surfacing table and visually checked for bluing and heat spots. You'll see the original set on the left has signs of bluing. My assessment proves that the second clutch from my other engine is in much better condition, so I'll be using that one. If this was a farm bike, I would probably still use the worn clutch, as there's still a bit of life left in it. However, I've come too far with this build to use an out-of-spec clutch pack. I've checked over both clutch baskets. This is the one I'm using from my spares. It appears to be in almost new condition, with very few signs of wear or grooves on the basket fingers. The first clutch plate that sits against the judder spring is slightly smaller than the rest. Should watch out for this. Exactly as the title says, in this chapter I'll be completing a full service of the coolant pump. In this final chapter, I check and service the two-stroke oil pump. Note, this is how I check the pump. There are some dangers in doing it this way, so copy at your own risk. Of course, this is a critical component. I have two of these and I check the functionality of both pumps in the same way. For the purposes of this video, I only show you the inspection of this pump that I'll be using. I put the drill in reverse at a low speed, then adjust the pump arm to all different positions, carefully checking all different flow rates. The old contaminated oil is now being pumped out, as you can see. I do several cycles like this until I'm happy with the outcome. Finally, as I install the gold case, you'll notice that the gasket is dry and the bolts are only pinched in place. I have not torqued these bolts, as the case will likely need to be removed when the two-stroke oil pump needs to be primed, which could be a few months away. As I wrap up the video, I'd like to thank everyone for staying until the end. If you find this video entertaining or useful, please leave a like, as it really helps the channel. Join me in part 2, where I'll be installing the cylinder head, stator, then putting the engine back in the frame. So that's about it for this video. Bye for now.